Hello there guys, welcome to the Drowsy Dragon. Today I'm going to talk to you about 3 specs that I really think you should try in Midnight. If you haven't yet decided on your main for the expansion, these 3 specs could be the one for you. So what we're going to talk about are how the spec is different because of the ability prune and how it feels to play in various types of content. We'll talk about the Apex talents and how they change the spec, if at all, and also how good is the spec in solo content, because that can be important as well. And then we'll take a look at what the pain points of each spec are. Let's dive in. Spec number 1 is Affliction Warlock. Now, this did receive quite a substantial rework. There's some big changes to the rotation that make it feel more reminiscent of the version of Affliction from Legion. So why is that good and how does it feel to play? So with what was cut from the spec, you can focus on applying and maintaining your dots, which feel a bit more impactful now in terms of the actual damage that they do. They're not just spells you cast to amplify your spenders anymore. This is still the case to some extent, of course, with it being Affliction, so you still have some ramp up till your damage actually gets fully going, but this has been improved, especially in AoE scenarios. The AoE rotation does feel reminiscent of how it felt in Legion, so if you enjoyed that, you're going to enjoy this. You throw out your Seed of Corruptions, paired with the talent Sow the Seeds, to get 3 seeds in one cast for a very satisfying burst when they pop. Having Shared Agony, too, to reduce the amount of times you need to press Agony in AoE, makes it less painful to put your dots on multiple enemies. Dark Harvest is also very satisfying to press. It deals damage to anyone suffering from your dots and also heals you for half of it, so really nice. In single target, the rotation is fairly simple of course, but having those shards to spend on the iconic spell Unstable Affliction and pairing that with your big summon Dark Glare with your other dots rolling, it does leave you feeling fairly mobile in combat as well, doing some nice chunky damage. And of course, you've got the spell Haunt, which is what you're going to apply to your main target to increase all the damage that you do to it. And this has some interplay with our Apex talents, which you'll see shortly. Now, being a Warlock spec, Affliction does have some very strong defensive, and you've got lots of options when it comes to surviving. Whether it's getting your Voidworker to tank for you when you're solo, and pairing that with spells such as Drain Life or Mortal Coil to siphon some health in a pinch and leave your enemy running in fear. You've got very good utility of course, excellent utility spells like Demonic Gateways for cheeky skips and mobility. You've got Soul Stones for saving those wipes during combat. You've got Health Stones for your entire party, and of course Summoning Stones to get your group all in one place. Now Curse's got a little bit of a tweak as well, and you've got new Blight spells, such as Blight of Tongues. So you can apply the Curse to a pack all in one go, rather than having to individually cast it on each mob. So this is a nice quality of life improvement. For mob control, you've got spells such as Shadow Fury, the AoE stun, or you could take instead Howl of Terror for the AoE fear. And of course you've got the baseline iconic spell, Fear itself. Now, pets offer choices of other abilities too, so we're still going to be using either the Imp for Dispel where needed, but most often we're going to be taking the Fell Hunter for the Interrupt. So you've got some nice flavour and ability there with pets. What got cut from Affliction then? Now, the biggest change of course was Malefic Rapture being dropped as the main spender. You had spells like Vile Taint as well that was cut from the AoE toolkit, as well as Phantom Singularity, Soul Rot and Oblivion, and the passive Shadow Embrace was also removed. Now this doesn't actually feel the spec feeling bare. You might think so with the loss of those spells, but the kit that it's got right now is very intuitive and it feels great to play. So how does Affliction do in solo content? Simple answer is great. It's very sturdy, it's got really good damage in both single target and AoE depending on your build. You can use a pet or you can sacrifice it depending on your playstyle, but using a pet such as the Voidwalker is likely going to be superior, because you can also share the damage you take with your pet through talents, but either way you can make use of its abilities for defensive such as the Voidwalker's shield, as well as all of your other CC and defensive options. So Apex talents, are they any good? Now for Affliction, they add some lovely flavour to the spec. You get this cool demonic soul that is called upon when you press Haunt. It deals damage to the target and 3 enemies around it that have your corruption applied. Haunt also gets a bit of a damage buff in the midpoint, and then once capped out, your Haunt has a chance to release that demonic entity and do a meteor attack, dealing uncapped AoE damage to all nearby enemies. It's cool as hell, it's very nice. Now what are the pain points with the spec? So Affliction currently has no way to extend its dots, so you really do need to keep an eye on them and try and hit that pandemic range for the most effective reapplications. This can sometimes lead to an awkward flow during your cooldown burst window, where you ideally want to keep pumping unstable afflictions and drain soul or shadow bolt into your enemy, but you need to stop to reapply your dots, so sometimes leaves you feeling like you've wasted your dark glare a little bit for a few seconds. Overall, in summary, Affliction Warlock feels really great right now. In my opinion, better than it did in the War Within. I love the nod to Legion Affliction that this spec has currently, and in every situation you feel like a strong, sturdy spellcaster with decent mobility, great utility, and generally something to press in most combat situations. The second spec to take a look at is Unholy Death Knight. Now, these guys also received a big rework. Unholy Death Knight has seen a big move away from the Festering Wounds bursting playstyle into the Master of Disease and summoning undead minions. The rework does leave you feeling like a true master of death magic, and summoning and necromancy, as it should do. So what got cut from the spec? The main thing that we lost was Festering Runes, but honestly, good riddance. So what happens now is when we cast Festering Strike, we get a buff on ourselves, which enables our next Scourge Strike to summon a lesser ghoul. We did lose Abomination Limb as well, which is a shame. Now this was a pre-midnight change of course, but it is still missed from the toolkit. It would be nice to have that. So what does the rework feel like to play, and is it any good? So Unholy Death Knight has a really nice flow to it. Between summoning short duration ghouls to claw away at your enemies, spreading your disease, and erupting the battlefield into a haze of pestilence and bones, we've got a new plague now called Dread Plague, which is only applied to one enemy at a time whenever you cast Outbreak on them. Now this explodes when the mob dies and automatically spreads to a nearby enemy, so it kind of keeps itself going. In general, once you get your diseases out, it feels a lot less like you need to manage the upkeep of them, with them kind of taking care of themselves as long as you do your rotation. So the big change in that when you cast Festering Strike, previously you used to put the debuff on the enemy target, but now the way it works is that when you cast Festering Strike, you get the buff on you to empower your next Scourge Strike to summon a ghoul. So with Scourge Strike being completely ranged now as well as a baseline, and the fact that the buff from Festering Strikes is on the player and not the target, you have much better time when swapping targets, and now it's also not as punishing when you need to move out of melee range. Honestly, if you get into melee range, cast Festering Strike a couple of times, that's easily going to buy you a few seconds at least where you can be at range and still do reasonable DPS, only losing out on your melee strikes from auto attack, which is literally about 2% of your damage. AoE also feels pretty great. Now, the rotation isn't that much different in AoE fights, it's mainly just using Epidemic rather than Death Call to spend your runic power, but abilities like Putrefy also feel that little bit more satisfying with the added cleave damage that it can provide when the ghoul explodes. The best change to AoE is that we no longer need to stand in Death and Decay in order to enable our AoE, so we can do this at range as well, and we don't need to worry about movement. We do have a bit of a ramp to consider, as you do get the stacking debuff called Clawing Shadows every time that you Scourge Strike, and that makes you cleave to an extra target. This goes up to 4 stacks. Once it is built up, of course, then you just pump in the damage. Bear in mind that you do have the option to bypass this ramp too if you take these Sandlayan hero talents and take the Inevitable trait from that row, which will make Heartstrike, for when you activate Dark Transformation, give you max stacks of Clawing Shadows instantly. And that's one example of how the talents work together quite nicely. You do of course keep all of these solid Unholy Death Knight utility, notably things like Death Grip still remain, and you can have 2 charges of it as well. We've also got our Kick, which is Mind Freeze, which is castable at 15 yards, and it's always going to be strong for controlling those annoying caster mobs. And if we can't kick, we also have the option of things like Anti-Magic Shell for ourselves, and Anti-Magic Zone for our group, if needed. Our personal defensives, Lichborn and Icebound Fortitude, remain as well as solid options. So how does the Unholy Death Knight fare solo? The simple answer is very well. We've got really good defensives, we've got the option to use Runic Power to Death Strike to heal ourselves back up, we've got Powerful Burst as well to nuke down targets before they kill you. We've got Slow in the form of Chains of Ice to kite mobs if needed, and also Strangulate as a stun. We've got our Kick, which again is short range, we've got your Pet's Gnaw ability that you can use for a stun as well. I mean, it really is the case that Unholy Death Knight has a strong toolkit when it comes to surviving and being self-sufficient in any kind of content. Are the Apex talents good? Now, the Apex talents sound incredible on the first read, very thematically cool and fitting for the Death Knight. Unfortunately, in reality, they feel kind of the same when you press them, and they aren't as visually impressive as you would expect them to be, given what they sound like. With that said, They are very strong when it comes to just dealing raw damage, with some lovely interplay with your other abilities and talents. So when we cast Army of the Dead, Death Coil then becomes Necrotic Coil for a duration, and it now hits 3 targets up from 1, also dealing piercing damage, which is quite nice. Our AoE rune expender Epidemic becomes Graveyard instead, which now causes all enemies with your Plague applied to pulse with shadow damage, which is kind of what it did anyway. So yeah, overall the hero talents are pretty cool, not much more to say about it, but there's just more damage. So what are the pain points with the spec? Genuinely, I struggle to find anything bad to say about Unholy Death Knight. It did get simplified with the ability prune, but all specs did. Unholy Death Knights have wanted to move away from the Festering Wounds pop-in playstyle for a long time now, and I really do believe that this rework, they've done a great job with it, and it feels very nice to play. So in summary, all in all, Unholy Death Knight is a very fun DPS class that has a good amount of utility to offer, its raid and Mythic Plus groups, it feels very satisfying to play, it's great in group or solo content, and the theme of being a master of death, necromancer, has been achieved, I believe. Rate it very highly. Sneaking out from the bushes is spec number 3, which is the Survival Hunter, also receiving quite another substantial rework. So Survival Hunters now have the ability to use one-handed weapons, or two-handed, so you do have a choice, but current tuning does dictate that two-hand is still the better choice for raw damage. Hopefully this balances over time, so you do genuinely have a choice. The pack leader hero talents for Survival have stayed pretty much the same, but the Sentinel tree got fully reworked. Of course, a lot of this relies around some passive damage and effects, but it also has the ability to extend some of your cooldowns or make your cooldowns come back off cooldown quicker. The most noticeable thing you'll see here that when you activate Takedown, that Takedown button becomes a new ability called Moonlight Chakram, which does function a little bit like the old Necrolord Covenant ability from back in Shadowlands. So why is it good and how does it feel to play? So the cooldown does feel really good to press, it's Takedown, and it's a coordinated assault from you and your pet, so again playing on that theme of you and your pet working together, which is basically what Survival is all about. You've also got the Wildfire Bomb still, which can have 2 charges. These still feel pretty nice to press. There is of course still the mechanic of the conal spread with the Wildfire Bomb, so you've got to try and position yourself and the mob in a way that when you throw the Wildfire Bomb, it hits all the enemies that you wanted to affect. So that does feel kind of good when you get it right, but I do understand that some people might find this a bit clunky. Then you've got this spell Boomstick. It feels good, it hits hard, it feels pretty chunky, and the shotgun blast should do right. It does look a little weird though, but hey, it blasts. It would be cool if you could glyph over this to give it a different effect, perhaps keep the old Fury of the Eagle appearance, potentially, but that's maybe something you can add later on. Now Survival also gained a decent change to Hunter's Mark. It's basically now a proper raid buff. It gives everybody hitting the target a 3% damage boost, regardless of damage type. So this is of course going to be very good and in demand in raids, and it's also quite beneficial on Mythic Plus, especially bosses. In AoE, you've got the option of this ability Flame Fang Pitch, which again feels and looks pretty great, it feels nice to press, but you do have the issue of the mobs being moved out of it. However, most of the damage appears to be in the initial explosion, so it's slightly less concerning if mobs do get moved out of the dot that's left on the floor. I suppose the solve to this would be to make sure that when you throw the bomb, the actual burn effect is on the mobs themselves and not just on the ground AoE, but I am indeed not a class designer, so that is not my job. So what's been cut from Survival? Now, Survival Hunter lost a lot. You've got Butchery, Flanking Strike, Explosive Shot, Coordinated Assault, and more. They are all completely gone. You have CC abilities like Implosive and High Explosive Trap, as well as Bursting Shot. They've gone as well, so our potential to physically move mobs is no longer. The spells like Mongoose Bite, they've been removed, but there's also still some interaction with Raptor Strike, which does stacking damage the more you use it, so that effect is still kind of in there. Kill Shot is also gone, which does sting a little bit, and that ability is now marksmanship only. Previously with Survival Hunter, it was a bit tricky to know exactly what to press. You had a lot of things that seemed decent, but the actual priority of spells was a bit difficult to keep up with. Now with this ability Prune, your rotation is a lot clearer, which is a positive change on the whole. Now, what about the Apex talents? Survival gets Raptor Swipe as its Apex talent. This basically provides more damage to your Raptor Swipe and your Wildfire Bomb initially. Once you've capped it out, your Raptor Strike will upgrade itself to Raptor Swipe, which means it will do a big cleave attack to all the enemies in front of you, dropping off in damage above 5 targets. Also, if you Raptor Swipe while buffed with Tip of the Spear, You'll cast another Strikers 1 at 300% effectiveness, so you just need to make sure that you press kill command before using Raptor Swipe to ensure you get the max benefit from this. So how does Survival Hunter fare on itself? Funnily enough, Survival Hunter is now actually quite good at surviving. It didn't used to be. You've got lots of lovely Hunter utility still. You've got your Freezing Trap to hard CC one mob. You've got Intimidation to stun a target. You've got Wing Clip and Concussive Shot and Binding Shot for slowing down and kiting mobs. You've got spells like Aspect of the Turtle and Exhilaration, which work well as your strong defensive toolkit. Turtle now has a shorter cooldown on it as well. And you've had an increase to the duration of Survival of the Fittest, so Survival is pretty good at dealing with incoming damage, thankfully. Now, what are the pain points with the spec? First of all, the visual identity in Class Fantasy is a little bit all over the place. There was talk of a Rexar theme, but it's kind of in a strange blend of identities mixed into one. The pack leader hero talent, Stampede, is great when it works well, when it goes in the right place. However, there is the issue of having to aim it so it hits the mobs that you want it to, or the risk of the tank moving the mobs away after Stampede is triggered. I've seen these Stampede pets go flying through the air above the heads of the mobs they're supposed to be hitting, or charging into places where they really shouldn't be going. So beware, make sure you aim your zoom carefully. Now, currently the single-handed is undertuned compared to the two-handed Survival Hunter, so even though you've now got the option, you do kind of need to play two-handed still if you want to be competitive with your damage. But as this is new, hopefully it will get balanced so that you genuinely have the choice, but we'll see. A summary of Survival is, it's perhaps not as impactful a rework as the other two specs we've mentioned today, but it does feel quite good to play. The Class Fantasy is in a strange spot at the minute, but rotationally, it's a fun spec to engage with and definitely worth a try. It's not a bad class to have in your group regardless of what type of content you're going to be doing with all of its utility options, and it's very good for solo players. The spec is much more simplified thanks to the ability Prune, which some of you may love, others may dislike. The rotation in single target fights compared to AoE fights is very similar, which might lead to this feeling a little boring after some time. However, you do have some different options of talent builds to switch things around a little. If you've ever been interested in trying Survival Hunter but worried about it being too complex in terms of rotation, with this rework implemented, it's definitely a good time to give Survival a try. And there we go guys, there are 3 specs that I really think you should try, especially if you're not sure what to main, because on these ones, you're going to have some fun, pretty much guaranteed. What are you thinking of maining for Midnight? Let us know in the comments, and if you have enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel for more guides and content from me, the Drowsy Dragon, as we head into Midnight and beyond. Comment below if you have any questions. Take care guys, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers!